download 178 games every second. This has not only made us the world's fastest growing mobile gaming market, but also, the second largest online gamer pool in the world. And I think, frankly, the pandemic, the lockdown had a bit of a role to play in it too. It created a self-propelling ecosystem where working professionals and students turned to online games for entertainment and social connect. So while we were spending 2.5 hours gaming every week prior to the pandemic, we are now hooked on for almost 6.5 hours. So all these things coming together, further enabled by an energetic fintech ecosystem where digital transactions grew by 5x in the last 2.5 years alone, has given us that sort of an impetus that will take this ecosystem, the gaming subsector, to almost 4x growth in the next three odd years.
Understand. No, fair enough. And I think those are actually very, very relevant and pretty exciting metrics that you just quoted, right? And I just want to take off on that, Sukamal, just to get your perspective, right? As you look at the India market now, and as you look at beyond the PC console into the wider mobile gaming market in India, what attracts you out here? What's exciting, for you to see?
All right. Thanks, Girish, for the question. And hi, everyone. So we are Riot Games. We are the publishers of games like League of Legends and Valorant, mostly PC titles. But yes, we are very attracted towards the Indian market, not just because of the PC potential, but also for the bigger opportunity that is on the mobile, right? And as publishers, I think the two things that helped us take this decision, saying like, why should we take this very seriously from India perspective? I think two things. First of all, is the ease of publishing games have become way easier, right? So back if we look at back in 5 years back, if somebody wanted to publish a game in India, the whole infrastructure was like very scattered, right? So you could not distribute, you could not monetize. That has become way easier. It has been solved to a huge extent by the standardization of like things like distribution, monetization, and also the access of the internet itself. That's the first thing, right? And the second thing that we have observed, and also thanks to the mobile games becoming such a big rage, is how engaged the audience is, right? And that basically enables publishers like us to bring experiences not just inside the game but also outside the game. Things like esports, like we can do TV shows, which a couple of them are coming towards the end of the year around our own IPs, and of course we can do merchandise, and there's so much potential that needs attention, right? Not just inside the game, right? So these are the two things which attracts us a lot to the India story, saying that we can publish games way easier now. And second thing is like the audience is hungry for engagement, not just inside the game, but for experiences outside the game. And this brings the whole story together. And now we want to put our hat in the ring and say we are coming to India and we're going to do it in the big way.
Understand. That's perfect. Anuj, coming to you, and I would like to sort of you to remove your Krafton hat for a second, and look back at your decades of experience in gaming in India, right? I mean, you were among the early pioneers here. You spent a lot of time in the space. Just want to get a sense from you, and this whole round of investments that we've seen very recently. We also saw this, somewhere around the whole 2012, 2013 period. There was again, a round of investments that had happened into the space. But then we didn't see the next round happening and the scaling up happening. We didn't see at the same way we seem to be seeing now. So what's different over the last 2 to 3 years than, say, at any earlier periods in the gaming ecosystem in India?
Right. Thank you for painting me as a veteran and making me feel old. So, so, so yeah, I mean, back when we started building a startup back in 2010 in gaming in India, there was literally, I wish I had statistics. What
I wasn't too far off with the decades. Maybe instead of plural, I should have stuck to the single.
Yeah, so I wish I had the statistics that Atul shared. I mean, those are amazing statistics. Even I'm impressed, and I've been evangelizing India for like the last 10 years that we should do something here. So I think that is one part of your answer. Those statistics were not there back then, right? It was not just an issue of the macro picture. It was also which still are there are certain issues in terms of attracting talent to this industry, which is the largest issue, I would say, in the gaming industry that is there. But what has changed in the last 2 to 3 years? I'll give you just, I mean, the amazing data rates have led to massive consumption. Consumption leads to monetization. India is usually slightly slow to start in any trend, but when it sort of picks up and takes to a trend, there's no going back. The massive
Right.
scale, the economies of scale is just too big to ignore. And
Got
last 2 to 3 years, two fundamental things have changed. Uh, One is the battle royale genre, which is Battlegrounds, Mobile India. You have Free Fire, Call of Duty Mobile. That fundamentally has changed the way Indian gamers have shown their ability to pay for games in-app purchases. That is proven to a large extent that Indians can not just download a lot of games, but actually pay for content as well. That is the number one biggest change in the last 2 to 3 years. And the second uh, biggest change that has happened is you see companies like Krafton, for this instance, investing in the market, not just, you know, the mindset is not to just make money off Indian users. It is to build an ecosystem. It is to invest back to grow the ecosystem. I think very important for companies to think long term about this market. The Like I said, for the battle royale, it's a genre. It's been shown that there can be a large market. Investing in this will make a lot of sense going forward.
Understand. No, fair. And I think I want to pick on a couple of the points, Anuj, that you just sort of mentioned, right? And I think one of the things that Krafton and now and Battlegrounds is sort of shown, right, is India is not just a casual gaming market, right? And while a lot of the numbers obviously trend in that direction, particularly given that a lot of the users are early users, new users who are still trying to figure out and getting comfortable with the gaming ecosystem. So it's not surprising that most of them are casual gamers, right? But what Battlegrounds has shown is that there is a fairly large market for mid-core games, particularly mobile-driven games in India, and interestingly, and at least to something which is pleasantly surprising, is that market is not a metro tier one city market. It goes deeper into the country. It goes wider into the demographics, and I think that takeaway for me was actually very, very interesting to see. And in that context, just wanted to get your sense on, when you look at India as a market evolving, what genres, what types of not necessarily types of games, right? But what aspects around mid-core games and all do you think is going to drive and be successful as we look look a little ahead into the future?
Right. I think this is one of the most difficult questions to answer as to what is going to happen. I mean, if 3 years back you would have told me, uh, hey, Anuj, 1 GB game about 3D, we'll put 100 people together and they all have to survive. And I would have said, that's not going to work in India. Like, I'll be very honest. I would have said, that's no way that's going to work in India. Right.
Right.
And the Battlegrounds game was like egg on our faces of all the industry experts who thought that this can never happen, right? It is still 2 to 3 years away. So I think that's how the power of volumes sort of really plays out, and market forces that you have to understand.
Let me rephrase this. What is the takeaway then? What is the learning that you've seen, right, over the last 18 months, 24 months from this success, right? Which can be something that studios can use in India.
I think the India story is going to be a very we believe at Krafton, as well as I personally believe, that it's going to be a very unique story. You can learn from some of the other markets how they evolved, but like if you look at the China market, they've had a RPGs are really massive over there. The European markets, US. So you can take some learnings, but what you have to realize is Indians never played games
Mm,
before mobile arrived, right? So the culture of gaming was very limited to, say, the top 2% uh, before the real
mm,
mobile arrived and
mm,
gave scale. These are people who are 17, 18 year olds who have just 18, 19, they've just got a mobile device and they've started playing games. And
mm.
that's probably their first experiences have been on Ludo and
Yeah.
Battlegrounds and some of them Clash of Clans and these kind of games, right? So what they take up next is to be sort of very difficult to define. They are
Mm,
following a lot of the global trends to some extent, but there is uh, a sort of nostalgic factor with the local content as well. I
mm,
mean,
mm.
whether it is Ludo, Carom, all these kind of games. And initially, in the first wave of the mobile gaming, there was Teen Patti, which was
Yeah.
social casino. Again, very Indianized. The people relate to it
Mm,
very closely in the family. So
mm,
I think it will be what is the key takeaway, how this will shape out is quality wise, they will be unforgiving. They have played global games, they know the quality benchmarks of these games.
right.
But a mixture of Indianized content, Indian IPs with sort of the global quality benchmarks would be
Mm.
the obvious sort of thing to imagine how the future of Indian mobile gaming would be defined to a large extent.
Understand. And in this same context, I think one thing we saw differently, which which you guys did, was actually invest into marketing. A game like a consumer product, which was something that at least the gaming space had not really seen in a big way. And how important do you see that? In a country like India to be able to reach out to wide audiences.
Again, there are, see, if you're a global company,
Mm,
there are two approaches that you can take about the India market. One is to think of an Indian market as a large consumer base
mm,
and milk out revenues and user
mm,
base and user metrics. Second
mm,
is to actively come into the country,
mm.
invest in people so that you can reap the benefit the country as well as the ecosystem, as well
Yeah.
as get mutual benefits out of it,
Mm,
right? I mean, if you look at some of the companies that have done it and this can also spur entrepreneurship to a
mm,
large extent. If you
mm.
just take an example of say Zynga, they set up in 2010, around that period. Now we have two startups with over $500 million of exits who of the founders who worked in those companies,
Yeah.
right? So it's very important to understand and maybe it's important for the policymakers to encourage is to invite the first kind of companies that are actually engaging with the country, investing in the country, and that will lead to much larger entrepreneurs, much larger sort of benefits
Mm,
in the long term for the industry, right? And at Krafton, we generally sort of have to a large extent helped with Battlegrounds build a large part of the esports industry, the
mm.
gaming esports industry in India, right? And whether it is the content creators, whether it is our investment in Loco, which is India's game streaming platform.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are sort of thinking it, playing a slightly longer game. We
Mm,
we we feel that there is a massive amount of consumer love that we have got for Battlegrounds Mobile India. We
mm,
want to double down on it. We have invested over $70 million in the last 6 months
mm.
in various across three companies right now, Nodwin, Loco, and Pratilipi.
Mm.
So we are here for the sort of long
Under,
term.
understand. Taking on on a couple of the points that Anuj just mentioned, Felicia, just wanted to get your perspective on particularly the last angle, right? Which is about the whole ecosystem approach to looking at this space, right? This is not something that is unusual among global studios or global publishers, right? Where they tend to have presence across the value chain so that you can sort of, leverage your product far better than otherwise you would have been able to. As an investor, when you look at the space, and when you start thinking about a portfolio, how do you look at this angle? And particularly from an India context, standalone studios, multi-gaming platforms, or trying to create an ecosystem approach to multiple products coming together and working together. How would you sort of look at this?
Definitely. It really boils down to the individual investment thesis of the different VCs. Now, for Play, we are very focused on the early stage, and specifically gaming is so broad, right? We focus on free to play game studios particularly, and people talk about esports, but what about this and that? And that's those are all great, and those are growing industries. But for us, it's a financial game at the end of the day as well. We have 10 years to every fund cycle. We do have to return the money to our investors and then some. So we have that 10-year time frame in mind that we're thinking of, and we are looking also at scale. So when we look at that, we look at free to play as being one of the largest revenue opportunities. Now within that, obviously, like you said, you can be multi game platforms. You could be standalone games. I don't think it's a case of like, standalone games are like the thing of the past, and the platforms are the way forward. I mean, each model has its pros and cons. Obviously, with a multi-game platform or a super app, if you will, right? You're looking at multiple types of games that can retain users, that can attract users at a different price point, different type of games that monetize users, so you get a better lifetime value and better longer lifetime for the players. So it's, for us, that's interesting, obviously, because one of the things that we always look at with games are like, what's your retention, right? If people are going to ask you what's your day 1, day 3, and day 30, and if you are a hyper casual game, that day 30 is going to look like something, and the question is going to say like, the question is going to be, well, you're losing a lot of users, and there's problems with monetizing with that within hyper casual. What are you going to do with a multi-game platform? That's obviously going to be a different answer, because well, there's like 100 different games to choose from. They're going to hop from this to that. I can cross promote them, but keep them within an app. Obviously, publishers typically would do the same. They have different games within their publishing network, and they cross promote, but there's always a chance of leakage, right? So I think where multi-game platforms are interesting is that it addresses that leakage problem in a really interesting, cohesive way, complete with engagement. Now you can watch streams within the same platform. So that's how we look at it. But of course, again, it's not necessarily that you can only succeed with a multi-game platform. You can't succeed with a standalone app. I think there are different teams are going to be suited to different things, and I think it goes back to, again, like, what is the experience of the founding team and their skill sets, and what's going to be the best fit for them.
I understand. Fair enough. Just another angle, as a global fund, when you look at India, right? I think particularly parts of the gaming ecosystem in India around fantasy sports and RMG in particular has a regulatory uncertainty as it stands today, right? How do you factor that in your decision making, right? I mean, it's not something that is uh, very clear at the moment. It's not something that, and it's something that is evolving, right? So when you look at this space, how do you factor that into your decision making?
I think RMG is an interesting one in that India is not unique in the sense that the regulatory framework for this and the outlook is very uncertain. But we, with every company that we make an investment with, there's always the question of risk, and I think the more important thing that we're looking at is how is the company thinking, or how are the founders thinking about managing this risk. And if you look at India, for example, you have certain states who have made a decision. Some are being appealed. Then there's the federal and state rulings, and it's all different. And we're not looking for somebody who's going to say like, no, it's definitely going to be an optimistic ruling. We're looking at somebody who's going to be thoughtful about, how do I manage my risk exposure? Am I, more heavily exposed in a certain state? Do I have to diversify? Or if you think about somebody who's a really ambitious entrepreneur. Maybe he's thinking, I have my India playbook. Well, the world is my oyster. Where else do I see kind of regulatory frameworks that are going to be, the outlook's pretty positive. I have a great playbook. I can, repeat, adjust, iterate, and make it into a global company. So that's how we look at it. We don't think like, ooh, they're appealing it, so I'm going to stay away. I think it's always a considered decision.
I understand. Fair enough. And I think that's a good perspective to hear on. Atul, just coming to you, and I think you gave us some really interesting statistics and perspectives on what's driving and what's really happened in the last year or two, right? In terms of digital consumption, in terms of scale building on users, on the internet side, on the mobile side. I just want to take that forward, a bit to say that if when you look at the gaming market and the gaming ecosystem in India, how do you see this evolving, say in the next say 2 to 3 years, in particular, right? What are going to be the levers, and what do you see, driving a lot of the growth as we move forward?
Sure. So as Phylicia mentioned, there is a need to bring in a sense of transparency, to further enhance the credibility of the sector, and which is why Invest India, my team here, works very closely with everyone here and their peers in the industry to sort of represent the industry at the right forums, the right corridors, right? But I spoke about how this industry is really, really ballooning, right? Enabled by multiple factors. And I think that will continue, and it will, of course, further be enabled, and it will snowball into something much larger if we have that right regulatory environment, which is what we're working towards. More importantly, though, Girish, one of the things that, again, the larger gaming ecosystem and, everyone here and the peers have expressed, that is, I won't say an impediment, but a sort of a worry is that, despite all this growth, right, despite the fact that in the last 10 odd years, the number of gaming publishing companies, etc., in India has grown by 10x odd, right? There is a severe dearth of talent. There is a severe, each company here, each company in the ecosystem focuses on talent and innovation, and they feel that there is an urgent need to equip the workforce with the right set of digital skills. And I think that is something that I should have mentioned earlier. That is something that I think a lot of people are worried about. And if we were to solve that one bit, where we match our consumption to production, then that will be the biggest enabler for us. Is what I firmly believe.
Understand. And I think it's a very valid point, right? We tend to focus a lot more on the demand side of the equation, right? In terms of the consumers and monetization and whole host of other things. But it's the supply side also that needs to be sorted out, particularly for studios in India to be able to get scale, right? And I completely appreciate the point that you're saying. I think in some ways we started to see a lot more supply happening now than say 5 years ago. But you're right. I think the talent building angle of it is going to be a slow burn. It'll take time before it sort of happens. But I think investments around that is definitely something that's going to be critical. And to that extent, just trying to get a sense of what do you think, what kind of support do you think the government can bring in, right? And I'm looking at it from what we see happening in certain other gaming ecosystems, right? Say, for example, say Canada or some of the other countries where there's a whole infrastructure that has been set up by the government, both financial, technology, and in a whole host of other angles, where which sort of enables a lot of these gaming startups to develop and and build scale, right? What do you think can be done in India to sort of help some of these aspects to be built up?
Sure. So you see, Girish, here's the thing, right? I mean, more than 1 million STEM graduate every year in India, right? But
Right.
they're not immediately employable, and of course, the government recognizes that, right? So one of the ministries with whom we work very closely, at least my team does, is the Ministry of Electronics and IT, right? And MATE runs a lot of programs when it comes to all things upskilling, especially in things like artificial intelligence, machine learning. I mean,
Yeah.
there are these government programs. NASCOM, for example, also runs an upskilling program with MATE. Niti Aayog has been added, and of course, across different ministries, across both the central and the federal government, there are various programs. There are conversations that we are a part of around AVGC policies that will enable this upskilling. Now, of course, I'm not saying that there are very specific programs to sort of train the
Hmm.
workforce on
Hmm,
things
hmm,
like
hmm,
gaming. But then, of course, peripheral skills, right? I mean, if artificial intelligence, design, things like that. So these things are happening now. Of course, again, we are at a very nascent stage. The government is a consensus-based democracy government, right? And things tend to move slowly, but it is happening, right? And the one thing that, again, in conversation with the gaming ecosystem, we constantly urge the ecosystem to let us know whether they have any ideas on how to, probably accelerate this adoption, right?
hmm.
Accelerate this upskilling process. We are more than happy to help in every way possible. We need ideas. We are working on a few, but we definitely need more ideas, right? But long story short, again, to summarize, there are a bunch of programs, perhaps not specifically to gaming and design, but then there are a few, the government's at it, and yes, we probably need to do a lot more.
Understand. Fair enough. Sukamal, just picking off from there, and I think I mentioned the demand side of the ecosystem a bit, and I just want to get your sense on it, right? So you've been globally, PC console, a publisher, and as you look at India, while those elements continue to be relevant, the mobile market is also something which is probably a larger opportunity as it stands in India, right? But
Yeah.
one of the challenges which most investors as well as global companies, when they look at India, is the gap between the user base and the monetization, right? I mean, the ARPUs in India are probably among the lowest in the world. India is probably uniquely an ad dominant market as compared to an IAP dominant market, particularly when you look at the casual gaming ecosystem, right? When you keep RMG and fantasy sports out, it's fundamentally ad driven market today, right? So in that context, just wanted to really figure out how do you look at the monetization challenge to a certain extent in India, and how do you see that evolving as we grow forward? When you look at the space.
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic question, right? And I think I would like to bring back 2 points, one from Atul and one from Anuj. So the
Mm,
way that Anuj described the Indian market when it comes to monetization, that we are slow, right? When we it's slow to open up our wallets because as Indians we always like to investigate: is there value? Is there value? And when we are convinced that there is value in our purchase, we are very happy in opening up our wallets, especially
mm,
during Diwali time, festival times. We are okay, even we might not have a lot of savings, but we don't have a problem in making those big purchases when it comes to seeing the value, right? And the best way to describe this is our love for elephants, right? So we are Indian elephants, right? So we are very slow to move, but once we start moving, it's impossible for us to stop, right? And that's the same analogy also works from a monetization perspective, right? And we are seeing a lot of trends which are changing our hypothesis even within Riot itself, right? So when we investigated the Indian market like a couple of years back, the hypothesis was it's a massive player base, a lot of capital needed to service that player base, and the
mm,
returns are going to be so minuscule that the bottom line is going to look terrible for a long time, right?
mm,
And so the first experiment, or which was let's say a surprise, I would say, was our game for the PC with Valorant, right? So this game, when we launched when we dropped the game in India, we knew that that it is going to get picked up because Indians love to play the games which action, right? But the the risk was not very high, because if you look at, if we had dropped a mobile game with shooting elements versus a PC game, the chances of servicing a huge player base on PC versus a huge player base on mobile is a different scale. We are talking 1 million versus 40 million, right? So the risk of launching a game like this in India was fairly I was conservative, right? So when we launched, we saw
mm,
the uptake both in terms of player volumes, as well as the value that these players are bringing in was huge, right? And that changed the whole narrative of saying, hey, is India a market with value or volume? And we are very happy to like not to say now with full confidence that India has a very good mix of both player volume and value, right? And we have seen this even in terms of like big whale games, right? Like Krafton and what Garena is doing, right? And they are constantly updating that hypothesis. Is like you just need to have a very strong vision of how do you keep on engaging your users to a point where they see value in whatever they're acquiring inside your game, right? And that's what we have experienced with our own PC game, and now we are seeing this happen with basically like with mobile
Mm.
games as well. And yes, I mean, like, the number of games which have been able to have that success is still very limited, but we are here for the long term, and we don't necessarily think that it is not going to change for a lot of other games as well. Just keep on increasing the engagement of your player base, and very soon they will reward you with not just their time, which is very precious, but also with enough capital to make sure that you are very happy with running the game and servicing this audience, right? That's the first thing.
Understood.
Uh,
So
and
just one angle.
just one more thing. So when it comes to Atul, right, so you mentioned like the which is a very interesting take, which I just thought about it when you were talking, right? When you said the talent pool, the lack of, let's say, talent in this industry, right? So the two metrics, right? First of all, like people like Anuj and me, so we transitioned from people who were gaming to getting into the industry and working our way up to over the last 10 to 15 years, not calling ourselves veterans, but let's say the very interesting journey over the last 15 years where we have transitioned from being consumers to basically coming back as people who are going to bring the service back to people who the new set of gamers, right? Earlier we were servicing about, that Anj said, 2% of the entire population who were playing the game from India. Right now it is crazy, right? More than, let's say, 300 million people who are playing the game on mobile. So the hypothesis is very simple, right? You do not need, let's say, a mass program to bring up the talent. It is happening as people are playing the game more, engaging them more, and they're learning what works, what doesn't work, because they are consumers now, right? And very soon you'll see the talent pool explode exponentially. That's the same thing that has happened in NA, in EU, in LATAM, where now the people who are the ones who are captains of the industry, they have come from the consumer side. And now it's only the last 2 years that we have seen this part of consumers. In the next 5 to 6 years, you'll see a lot of those consumers now transitioning into people who are going to work for the industry. Right now, you have people who are now going to build businesses around it, be it marketing, branding, content creators, esport organizers. And I think the whole question of like, do we need a program? Technical side, maybe yes, but when it comes to creating new businesses and being entrepreneurs, you will see the next wave of entrepreneurs creating those unique stories that are going to come from India. So I would, firmly believe that the supply side is going to change considerably over the next 5 years, where you'll have, like, say, millions of people like me and Anuj coming and like talking on the same platforms and talking about their journey, and it is going to be a very different conference in 5 years from now. That is my belief.
Got it. No, I think that's great. I just had one follow-up question to you on this, and the reason I wanted to mention this is we spoke about how India is today an ad dominant market, whereas globally it's obviously IoT driven. But is this therefore also an opportunity to use that ad model and potentially, not potentially, with particularly around the whole rewarded ads model, which seems to sort of target that in between consumer, right? The guy who wants to play more, who wants to get all the access to the entire gameplay, but who's still fence sitting when it comes to paying actual money. Do you see rewarded ads as a model which potentially can be far more successful in India than and therefore pave the way for IPs to grow in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I think it has to be like, with a lot of thought that needs to go into, like, what exactly am I exposing my consumers into. I don't want to, like, like, give them things which are irrelevant for them, and
Mm,
they consume that just for the sake of getting something, right? So even in our games, right, so we do have we do experiments, right? So for example, we have a game called Legends of Runeterra, which is a card
mm,
game, CCG, right? It's slightly niche. I play the game a lot. There, the monetization model is very different, right? So there we don't really believe that cards should be bought, right? Cards should
mm,
be acquired, and the way to acquire the card is, like you said, right? It has to be with doing or playing the game more because they enjoy the game so much
mm,
that they are being rewarded with more and more new cards as they keep on playing, right? So the whole concept of rewarded ads, I would not necessarily call it ads, but it has to be going back to something which they love to do, and they
mm.
are being rewarded for doing that, right? So that is what I believe is a much better way to build engagement, rather than just show them something which might be irrelevant and doesn't have any value for either the consumer nor the person who's investing in that, right? And
Understood.
saying that, so if you even in-game ads, right, so that's something which we do for specific events and activations. For example, when we do esports inside our games, when people are, like, the millions of people are watching our game being played by professional athletes, there you can see that the game itself, the map of the game, will carry specific branding of
Mm,
sponsors, etc., right? So traditionally within the game we don't carry ads, but when it comes to specific events, and when we know that the viewership is the people who are consuming the game is not playing the game but are consuming the content around the game, there it becomes a very interesting way for us to expose that audience to something which makes a lot of sense from a branding perspective, right? So
understood.
different ways of doing the same thing. So TLDR is like, no, there is no right or wrong, let's say, monetization method. It is just to find the right balance to see what is of value for your users, and how, in a way which is non obtrusive, at the same time it doesn't break the brand of your game and the experience. So this is what the TLDR from our perspective is when it comes
Got
to
it. Got it.
non-IIP monetization.
Understand. Fair enough. I think we are almost out of time. I just want to, there are a couple of questions that are there. I'll just sort of pick some of them up. Anuj, I think one question that's come up a couple of times is around AR and VR, right? And their potential when it comes to gaming and gameplay in India. Is that something, do you see as something that is real and practical in terms of the potential in India, or is this something that's likely to be a niche kind of a opportunity?
No, I mean, depends on if you call Pokemon Go as a niche.
Fair
Then
point.
I would love to be in that niche. So my point is AR and VR as an industry is interesting. Its growth, not just in India, globally, has been sort of challenged by a lot of hardware and physical interfaces which have created certain usability issues. They are being solved. It's not going to be solved immediately. I
Hmm.
think more and more where we go to wearables, the processing powers are improving,
Yeah.
more use cases develop. Uh, India will not probably be uh, at the top of the funnel in terms of leading innovation in those sectors. I feel, but it will be the mass consumer space where you cannot ignore it, right? So
Right.
it's not a market that you can ignore where you want scale with any of the technology.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think innovation from India and AR VR is very difficult to build out.
Hmm.
So having said that, it's not impossible, but yeah, that's slightly more challenging to build out of here.
Understood. Fair enough. Just one last question before we wind up, and I think there's an interesting one which maybe Atul, you can help us with. Uh, so there are a couple of COEs that have been set up in in different states, and particularly which sort of works around the gaming ecosystem. So there's the Image COE in Hyderabad. There's one in Aizawi around gaming tech. It's an interesting concept in the sense, if they are built out correctly, right, and there's the opportunity to use them as to leverage the whole the wider ecosystem itself, right? what's the sense around that? And do you see more such COEs being developed? Do you see the roles of those COEs being expanded to sort of help grow the ecosystem?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the intention and the aspiration here is to not just have these COEs in different pockets across the country, but have a more robust structure, a sort of a backbone structure, such that it is primarily driven centrally by the federal government, right? And yes, there are ideas around it. I mean, of course, I can't really expand on it right now, but we have been in conversation with our certain nodal ministries on this whole idea, and a bunch of ministries are coming together to explore this, right? And when we talk about COE for gaming, we just don't mean gaming as such, but that extends to as Anuj was talking about AV, AR and VR too. And so yeah, so to answer your question, yes, these COE exist. They are something that state governments probably started or took it upon themselves to initiate this, and sort of perhaps a proof of concept of sorts. But then the idea is to make it a bigger, larger program, and we are at it. I can't say when, but we should hopefully have something structured around this soon. And one quick point to Anuj's thoughts on AR and VR, right? 5-6 years ago, if someone were to ask us that, what do you think about mobile gaming? Can it really happen? We possibly, it's quite possible that we would have been apprehensive, right? Because we didn't have mobile phones. Each one of us didn't have one then. I think a lot of innovation that happens in tech is definitely driven by hardware, just as we did a lot of things with mobile manufacturing, right? There were a bunch of schemes, the production link incentive schemes and whatnot around mobiles, and then IT hardware. We will have something very similar soon on AR, VR, hearables, wearables, and all these other things. So the idea is that, of course, yes, we don't tend to talk a lot about it, but then there are a bunch of things happening in the background, and hopefully you'll hear very soon on both the hardware-related initiatives and initiatives around center of excellence.
Excellent. Great. I think this has been a really excellent conversation. I think we heard some very interesting perspectives from different aspects and different approaches to looking at the India story. So thank you so much to all of you, Phylicia, Sukamal, Anuj, and Atul. Thanks for all of your insights and your time, and hopefully the audience has found this as an engaging a conversation as I found it. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
That was really an insightful session, and I believe all of us had a certain key takeaways from it. I would like to thank all the speakers for sparing time to have this highly commendable talk. Another thank you goes to all our attendees who are here with us today. Thank you so much, everyone. We will be back soon. Just stay tuned.
Thank you.